Welcome to Parker's MMA show. If you want to learn about all things going down in the fight world, you've come to the right place. Each episode, your host Parker Keane will take a deeper dive into the always entertaining world of sanctioned fist fighting. Now here's your host, Parker Keane.
Welcome to Parker's MMA show. We are on episode 29. Today we're going to be interviewing Sean Sheehan. He is a Irish MMA writer. He writes for SevereMMA. He's an analyst, a podcaster, really an expert on all things Irish MMA. So excited to get into this and really get some native perspective on what's going on across the pond for us. Sean, thanks for joining us today.
All right, thanks very much for having me. Always good to see people dressed up in their Irish gear and everything. So it's very good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was actually over when all this shit started going down. I was there March 10th. We were going for Paddy's Day, and then, of course, everything got shut down. So we spent 10 days in Kenmare and just in a house with 10 of my family, just living off gas station food and the liquor store, and that was pretty much it.
That's how we're all living at the moment. So that's the Kenmare in Kerry, was it? You're not too far from me, so.
Yeah, my grandmother was born in Glencar, Kerry. That's where she was raised, and then my grandfather was from Latin Tipperary. So we got to see where she grew up, and then we drove through Limerick, actually, and went to Tipperary and saw where Grandpa grew up. So we made the best of it, with all the pubs and everything closed, but was what it was,
Yeah, you drove right past my house, so funnily enough, when you're going that way.
Yeah, we should have stopped off. We could have done a live podcast.
We could have, yeah, but it was bad because it just happened like before St. Patrick's Day. So all obviously the St. Patrick's Day parade and all was cancelled all over the place. It was pretty bad timing here, and all obviously the pubs and the restaurants and all everything was closed down. So this kind of, I suppose, I don't know if it's the same in America, but I think here it's kind of the start of the year for the summer where people start getting back into pubs and beer gardens and everything after taking January and February off. So it was a bad time for it to happen, I suppose.
Do you participate in the dry January?
I do.
That seems to be a very very Irish thing. All my Irish family and friends that are here in the States now, every January. Oh, we're going on the dry January, so
why would you do that? A month, that's just a month wasted. It's what that is.
Yeah, that's what I tell them too. So, all right, let's jump into it. First, I wanted to just check, how are things in Ireland? Is it kind of the same as it was mid-March, or have they locked it down even more? Or?
Oh yeah, it's completely locked down. Yeah, no, we're not allowed to go more than 2 kilometers from your house.
Wow.
Basically the same as America in terms of people can't congregate together. It's actually I think it's only 2 people can go together, even if you're going outside. You can only go outside for exercise. Only people who are essential workers are allowed to work. So if you work in supermarket, or if you work in a hospital or whatever, you can work. But say people working in like factories or barbers and all, everything is closed down. So it's not been too bad here. I think yesterday was the most deaths. Was how many? I think it was 36 deaths in a day. But obviously Ireland is a smaller country compared to America and everywhere else. But I think we're doing relatively well. It's hard to say we're doing well when 36 people died. But I think it's 4,000 cases here. So I think we're handling it pretty well, and hopefully we can get that curve to flatten and go the other way. But it's a tough time for everyone. Like, I suppose maybe it's not as bad in terms of people getting it and people dying here as it is in other countries, but we're the same in terms of the people kind of locked up, and we're the same lockdown as everyone else, and we will have for another while. So it's it's a tough situation, I suppose, for everyone to deal with.
Well, let's jump into some MMA. I wanted to ask you, how would you describe the current state of Irish MMA? We've had superstars like Conor McGregor, obviously, James Gallagher and Bellator, and then a lot of other SBG fighters rising up. How would you explain kind of the current state of MMA?
Yeah, I suppose just before this all started, I don't know, I think I did it on the SevereMMA podcast, and the main podcast, we were talking about how it was really a turning point for Irish MMA, because for a long time, cage warriors hadn't been in Ireland. Bellator has only started coming in the last few years, and now they have 2 or 3 headliners created from Ireland. We've local cards like Cage Legacy coming back. The UFC are coming back here in, when is it, August. So this was like the turning point for Irish MMA. We had the death of Joe Carvalho a few years ago, which kind of halted Irish MMA totally. There was almost no events in Ireland for the last, 3 years now at this stage. The UFC haven't come back in 5 years. Bellator were really the only ones doing it. So this was the turning point. You know, Cage Warriors had 2 cards lined up. Bellator had a card lined up. UFC had a card lined up. Cage Legacy had a card lined up. So it was great. And this has kind of turned it all on its head now.
Yeah.
So you'd hope that when everything comes back, we'll get back to that position. So what I think we are in right now is, if it might be a weird thing, but if you look at the curve, kind of we've got to the worst part of Irish MMA, and we're coming back to the best parts of it again. And hopefully, when it all comes back, we can land back again into the a position where we're looking forward and looking at good things rather than struggling with what has happened over the last few years.
Yeah. So you mentioned Cage Warriors, you mentioned Bellator, you mentioned UFC. I mean, who is the biggest promotion in Ireland right now? Is it still the UFC, or is it kind of seen a changing of the guard?
I think, I was on Ariel's show with him a couple of months ago, and he asked me this exact same question, and I said it's debatable because Bellator have, apart from Conor McGregor is the only Irish-born, Irish-trained fighter in the UFC now. The only one.
Wow.
Joseph Duffy's the other Irish fighter, but he's obviously in Canada. So everyone else is basically in Bellator. But I think there's 5 guys. No, there's more than 5. There's maybe, let's say, 10 guys in Cage Warriors, and all the rest are in Bellator. So Bellator have that fan base. If they put on a card with James Gallagher, they're going to fill the Tree Arena here, and they're going to have a really good card. So it's definitely a contest. Like, Cage Warriors aren't there yet. They've only had, is it 1 or 2? They've only had 1 card back in Ireland so far. Yeah. So maybe if Ian Gary or Paul Hughes or one of them comes to the top, maybe they'll be there. But my changing of thinking on it, and maybe still putting the UFC on the top, was when that UFC card got announced, because a Bellator card gets announced, right? And you might hear from 1 or 2 of your friends, or you might hear from like the other media people saying, or you might go and book a hotel, or whatever. When the UFC was announced, you looked at your phone an hour later and you had 40 messages. You said all your friends, like, let's organize a date. Are you going to have to book the hotels? And it's just, it's different. And as well, the UFC was actually, it's probably changed now, but he was supposed to be on the All-Ireland hurling final weekend, which is, if anyone knows hurling, it's the biggest sport in Ireland. 82,000 people in Croke Park were going to be for that match, and Limerick were going to win it, obviously, but it was going to be the night before that. So it was planning to be a huge weekend that you could go get away, get to Dublin, and the place would absolutely be, it would be bombed, so it'd be huge. But I still think, because the UFC still has a draw. The UFC still has those 3 letters UFC, and that's still going to be bigger than Bellator. As Ian Gary said to me on an interview once, people don't wake up in the morning and or go to bed at night, and dream of fighting for Bellator. So, that's little bit harsh, but it is kind of true in fairness. So I think that's the situation of it now.
Do you think there's anything Bellator could do to overtake the UFC in Ireland, or if there's anything they're kind of on the path to right now that would, if a couple of things happen, all of a sudden we're looking at Bellator being the main show in town?
I think they've done everything they can do, and I think they're right up there with them. Like, it shouldn't, like, if I asked you guys who's bigger, Bellator or UFC, you're obviously going to say UFC. The fact that I even have to question it means that they've already done it. The only other thing they could do is sign Conor McGregor, which would we're here like this, but that's not going to happen. But I think they've done it. I think they've done everything they need to do. Like, the UFC haven't come back to Ireland in 5 years. They haven't put many shows on in England. They have put 1 show on in Scotland a few years ago. They've really let down this side of the world. Like, they haven't put great cards. Okay, they had the Michael Bisping fight in Manchester against Dan Henderson. Was there? I think there might have been another title fight around here, but nothing huge. Bellator bringing, it's nothing huge. Like, the Darren Till Wonderboy fight, that's a good fight, right? But Bellator are bringing over Vincent Henderson here. They're bringing over Miles Jury to fight here. Pitbull is coming. They're giving us their best fighters, and I'm sure, like, down the line we might have Rory McDonald or we'd MVP as well. And they're creating Irish stars, and they're giving the Irish guys a big platform and main events, and Leah McCourt as well, giving her the main event. So they've done that great job. There's a market here. Like, Conor McGregor has created a huge market in Ireland and the UK as well. And Bellator have taken advantage of that where the UFC didn't. So I think, if anyone listens or watches WWE and wrestling, knows the history of that. What Vince McMahon always did was he saw a territory and he took it for himself. And if anyone got a stronghold there, he didn't want that to happen. He went in and he took it. The UFC have copied a lot of stuff WWE have done, but they didn't do that here. You know, they did that years and years ago, and they thought, right, we have it now. But then Bellator, and you know, this is actually a good conversation for maybe another podcast possibly. But you know, I said the UFC had announced the card. They announced that card on the week Bellator were in Ireland. Like, I think that was like the signal of a war starting there. So I think the UFC want to get this area back. They want to start signing Irish fighters again. And they don't want to let Bellator get this stronghold. So I think that makes, I think, you know, you asked me about the health of Irish MMA. I think if Bellator and UFC are in a bit of a battle for Ireland, that's great for Irish MMA, because you could see Bellator and UFC both bringing over really big fights to here, and that's only for benefits Irish MMA.
So let's transition to Conor. You mentioned him a couple times. What impact in your mind has Conor had on Irish MMA, and what was your experience like watching him, you know, rise through the ranks from Cage Warrior to the UFC, you know, to craziness with Floyd Mayweather? Yeah, what was that experience like in Ireland?
Yes, have you got to spare 2 hours? It's one of those.
Yeah, let's go.
It's pretty crazy. Like, for me, I wasn't covering Conor McGregor when he was fighting like 1-0 and stuff like I am kind of with the guys now, because it's changed. I was covering like the UFC when he was coming up in Cage Warrior and stuff. I covered his Cage Warriors title fights and stuff, so I have seen him coming from Cage Warriors. But like, I remember like talking to the lads. Say I work for SevereMMA now. I came on, I think, just before McGregor got to the UFC, possibly with SevereMMA, and they've been covering, like, the SevereMMA did the documentary with McGregor and stuff, and like the lads have seen him coming up from day one, and everyone you spoke on, even me seeing him beforehand, he's the same now as he was then. You know, he was always this brash, cocky, really good fighter, basically, and I think obviously like the things have gone sideways at times and stuff with the fame, as they tend to do, but I think the thing about McGregor is, right, he got to the UFC and he was, 15 fights in, I think. So I think people saw this guy from Ireland coming in and thought, right, this Irish guy, he's not going to be able to wrestle, he's not going to be able to do jiu-jitsu. Okay, he might have good boxing, but we're going to destroy him. But people didn't realize that he'd been fighting black belts in Cage Warriors. He'd fought for 2 Cage Warriors titles. He'd 15 fights. Like, you'd rarely see someone coming into UFC now with 15, 16 fights. He had that backing behind him. He didn't, like, he destroyed Marcus Brimage, who's a good fighter. He destroyed Max Holloway on one leg, came through, beat Brandao in Ireland after coming back from that knee injury, you know, beat Denisiver, beat Chad Mendes. And I think in the space of 11 months, he fought Jose Aldo, Nate Diaz twice, and Eddie Alvarez in the space of 11 months. Like, we've never seen anything like that before. That's absolutely meteoric to have those fights. And then we had the Floyd Mayweather stuff and the Khabib stuff and all after that. It's huge. When I started covering MMA, like, I was writing about the UFC maybe a year, 2 years before, maybe not, around that, before Conor McGregor. Before I had heard of Conor McGregor. So I was like, I didn't know anyone else in Ireland covering MMA. When I started covering it, I didn't know any Irish MMA fighters. I knew nothing about Irish MMA. I was covering the UFC. I was covering, you know, John Jones or Chuck Liddell, whoever it was back then. I knew nothing about Irish MMA. I'm down in Limerick, like the epicenter of Irish MMA is in Dublin. Yeah. And now Irish MMA is huge. Like, there's Irish MMA fighters headlining Bellator cards, signed for the UFC and everything. Like, in that short period of 7 years, it's like exploded from a person covering MMA in Ireland, didn't know Irish MMA fighters, to now Irish MMA being arguably one of the strongest countries in the world for MMA. So it's been absolutely meteoric.
Right. And then let's talk a little bit. I was at the fight with Cowboy live, and the following by the Irish people was not what I would have expected. Obviously, Conor, the last 5 to 7 years, has been on this just meteoric rise to stardom from basically nothing, and he's had his highs, he's had his lows. At one point, you know, I have a lot of family that lives over here from Ireland. I remember it was probably around Nate Diaz 1. And it just seemed like everyone was on the Conor train. I mean, everyone was backing him. They were living and dying by Conor. And then I saw a lot of that fall off, you know, after he lost to Nate Diaz and then had the nasty kind of back and forth with Khabib. What would you say the current state is of the Irish people and how they feel about Conor McGregor?
Like, I think it might have seemed like that to people in America and even to people in Ireland, maybe, you know, coming up. I don't think everyone was always behind Conor McGregor. I think at one stage there was a lot more people behind Conor McGregor than there is right now. But Ireland is a country where a lot of people hate people when they're doing well or when they're very cocky, like McGregor.
Very
McGregor,
unforgiving.
Yeah, McGregor's not exactly your stereotypical Irish hero, like, you know,
Right.
or Irish sporting hero, I suppose. A new sport that people don't really know, very kind of brash and swearing and stuff. And a lot of people in Ireland would love that, but a lot of people would hate it as well. A lot of people that loved it were bandwagon fans. You know, you're wearing the rugby shirt there. Everyone who's a rugby fan in Ireland is a bandwagon fan, because rugby didn't exist in Ireland until about 30 years ago. And then everyone was like, oh, I go out on a Friday night with my girlfriend and we'll wear matching scarves and we go to see the rugby. And that's the kind of, that's what it is here. You know, we go to Vegas to see Conor McGregor with the lads when we're on the visa over to America, or we'll go for a week in the summer or whatever. A lot of it was that. Now, there's a lot of hardcore fans as well. And you see 9,000 of them every time there's a Bellator event in Dublin and when there's a UFC event. So McGregor still has those hardcore fans that are with him. Now, some of them, because of the antics and things have happened that legally, a lot of things we can't say that have happened or have or haven't happened. People have fallen off the bandwagon with him. A lot of fallen off the bandwagon because he's lost. A lot of fallen off the bandwagon because he hasn't been fighting that much recently. But there's still a lot there, and a lot more came back after he beat Cowboy. So now I'd say it's probably it's not as high as it was. It's the highest of highs are still not there, but I don't think the lowest of lows are there either now. I think he's on his way back, and we're talking about these curves again. He's maybe quarter of the way back up the curve to get to his best position again. But you know, can he do it? It's very difficult because he hasn't fought that much recently. No, he's not been able to train, I presume, with the whole coronavirus thing as well. So it's going to be very difficult. And with the lightweight title picture up in the air now as well, with an interim title and Khabib not fighting, it's an odd situation here over the next year.
There's a lot of uncertainty surrounding UFC 249, but there's not a lot of uncertainty surrounding our new sponsor. So, support for Parker's MMA show is brought to you by Manscape, who is the best in below-the-belt grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. I know, Parker, I've been using this guy, the Lawnmower 3, during the quarantine to make sure my man parts are freshly groomed while I'm stuck in my house. Their third-generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to prevent manscaping accidents. Millions of balls are about to be nick-free thanks to Manscaped's advanced skin-safe technology. So if you're listening to me speak right now, I want you to experience it firsthand for yourself. Get 20% off and free shipping with promo code FIGHT. That's FIGHT, FIGHT, at manscaped.com. So 20% off, promo code FIGHT. They support us, so we support them. Manscaped.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned kind of your typical Irish sports star, because the guy I remember growing up was Robbie Keane, who obviously is nothing like Conor McGregor at all. So that's kind of who I think of in terms of, you know, having kind of that, you know, almost like a stoic attitude, taking a lot of joy in playing his sport of choice. So, you know, I never thought of it like that, but that's interesting. I want to kind of pivot here to, you know, if Conor McGregor's kind of the rise of Irish MMA, and you think we're at a turning point, who do you kind of have your eye on as some of the up and coming stars of the Irish MMA scene?
There's actually a lot of them right now. Like I think at the moment, where I said McGregor was ready for the top. You know, he came into the UFC with 15 fights, got his 2 or 3 UFC fights, and then he's ready to get to the top. I don't think there's anyone at that position right just now, but a lot of them are like, let's say where McGregor was 10 fights in. In the next 5 fights, they could be pushing on there. So you have the likes of James Gallagher, you have the likes of Kiefer Crosby. They're maybe, you know, earlier in their career, the likes of Paul Hughes and Ian Gary over in Cage Warriors. Look, I think in Bellator, obviously James Gallagher is the one you have to look at. Kiefer Crosby as well. Ian Gary is absolutely phenomenal, and he won our Irish Emerging Prospect of the Year this year over in SevereMMA. But I just think, maybe it's a little bit unfortunate in Ian Gary because he didn't get the fight, but Paul Hughes' last fight, his performance was absolutely fantastic. Every performance of his career so far has been absolutely fantastic. He has, I think it might stand him in the long run, but he's had, I think, 3 broken hands in his young career. He's only, 6 fights in. So he's come back from that now, and he's had 2 or 3 fights in the last 6 to 8 months. So he seems to be back now, and every fight he's had has been absolutely brilliant. So I don't mention Paul Hughes enough, and I should. I think he's probably, him and Ian Gary now, I think, are probably the two best coming through. They go into the UFC in a few years. And then you have James, you have Kiefer as well. Obviously, Peter Quealy, I suppose, is that one that's at the position right now where he could rise. If he beats Pitbull coming up in this fight, that's a huge win for anyone. So he's going to be rising there. We've Norman Park over in KSW. He's the interim champion there. So he's probably, he's probably the best Irish MMA fighter at the moment, apart from maybe McGregor. You'd have to say that. And then Leah McCord coming through as well. Danny Nyland, I think, is 2 fights in as well. She looks a really, really good prospect and a good athlete as well. She is. And there's probably someone I'm missing out here anyway. But there's a lot of them. If you look at any of the last Bellator cards, see people coming up. The Cage Warriors cards as well. Joe McColgan fought for the Cage Warriors title there in their last event. He lost after a good kind of start to that fight. But, there's a lot of people around. And it's a good time for Irish MMA, especially if you like, if your thing is you like seeing prospects coming through from 3, 4, 5 fights and rising up to maybe being a top 15 UFC fighter, now's a good time to start following Irish MMA because there's a lot of them. Let's say there's 10 of them. Maybe only one of them will ever get to that. But that's, I suppose, the chances you take.
For sure. I think, I think hearing you talk for our audience, obviously we're here in Texas, probably a lot of new names for them and probably not as in tune with the Irish MMA scene, Sean. I want to ask you, how did you first get into MMA? How did you get involved in MMA from Ireland?
I was in college down in Cork in UCC, and a friend of mine, we had how would you describe it? We had a little satellite box where we got 15 TV channels on that compared to 2 channels in the other, 4 channels in the other houses. So one of my friends, who's a really good friend of mine now, just used to come down to our house and watch The Ultimate Fighter in our house. And I was like, what are you watching this stupid stuff? I think it was Tough 2 maybe or something like that, or Tough 1, I don't know. But he used to have in the background, he used to come every week to watch Tough, and I just kind of started watching it, and I kind of got into it from there. I was working in a place for 10 weeks. I think it was between years in college, and I was living in an apartment with 4 Spanish students who didn't speak a word of English. So I was just like, what am I going to do here for this whole night? I was just watching UFC fights for 10 weeks nonstop on my laptop. So that helped. I think it was around the time I think Forrest Griffin maybe had 1 or 2 fights. It was a couple of years after I started watching. So I think Forrest Griffin had 2 or 3 UFC fights put in, and Rashad Evans and stuff, and went back and watched the old Chuck Liddell fights and stuff like that. And that's how I started watching MMA and the UFC, I suppose. What year was it? Around 2006 I started and got big into it, around 2009 maybe. And then it was a few years later, I was Dan Rose over in HOV MMA at the time asked me did I want to write an article. I used to be on the Tap Out Radio, with Crooklyn. I saw I was being the chat room there chatting with Michael Bisping used to drop in, and Tito Ortiz and stuff. It was great. It was a different time in MMA where you could actually just talk to world champions in a fucking MMA podcast chat room. It was a weird time. But Dan Rose, I was always putting up my picks and stuff, and Dan Rose asked me did I want to write an article and want to put my picks up on his website, and I said yes, and the rest they say is history. Just went kind of mad from there.
So kind of who are some of your favorite fighters in fights, knowing that you kind of came up, in that, 06 to 09 time period?
It's odd for me. When I started watching the sport, I kind of became a fan of the sport. And I used to spend evenings watching jiu-jitsu techniques on YouTube and boxing techniques and seeing different. I was never really a fan of a specific fighter. I'm a fan of every fighter. I like to say that because I think, and it's a weird thing to say. It sounds like a very, it's just the truth though. I'm a fan of Wonderboy. He's the only fighter I'm really a fan of because I remember seeing him in that. Do you remember that Chuck Liddell? That Chuck Liddell.
Chuck Norris.
Yeah, or Chuck Norris. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this fella's cool. And then he got signed to the UFC.
Yeah.
What? No way. I liked it ever since then. And that knockout of Dan Stitchen was absolutely unbelievable. So yeah, Wonderboy is the only guy I've ever really been a fan of in terms of, I don't know. It's kind of just a gimmick now, really, more than anything. But yeah, he's the only one. But I love lots of different styles. I love the style of Khabib Nurmagomedov. I think he's fantastic. I love the style of Conor McGregor. I love Francis Ngannou. I think he's brilliant. Even people like Mirsad Bektic. I love someone like him who's and Beneil Dariush as well. People who have like the ability. They have all the abilities, but they have like a little bit wrong with them, and they just can't reach that next level. And if they didn't have that bit wrong with them, I think that like Beneil Dariush, if he had a better chin, I think he'd be a world champion right now. I really do. Like, and I love fighters like that. It's like if they can turn that switch, and if they can change a little bit, they can become absolutely great. And like people like that, I love watching. I love watching guys coming up like Zabit Magomedsharipov. I think he's a fantastic fighter. Like Cyril Gane in the heavyweight division, absolutely brilliant. MVP Fabian Edwards over in Bellator. I think Fabian Edwards is an absolutely brilliant fighter as well. So there's lots of fighters I'm a fan of, to be honest. And the older guys, I love Chuck Liddell. I think he was fantastic. I don't think Chuck Liddell gets enough credit, to be honest, for what he's done for MMA and just becoming the first famous fighter in kind of maybe my era. I know that people before will say, Frank Shamrock and Heist Gracie and all of them people, but yeah, I think Chuck Liddell is one. I used to love watching Babalu as well. He's just a mad looking man as well. And so I've given you about 50 names there anyway. So Wonderboy. There you go.
There you go.
Parker,
all right,
you still got
Sean.
your Iceman. You still got your Iceman shorts
I got
behind
my
your
Iceman
head.
somewhere. Where are we at? There we go. My signed Iceman. There's your McGregor.
Oh, with his Ivory Coast flag.
I got Ivory Coast. There's Fury and Wilder. All right, so obviously a lot of drama the last week or so revolving around UFC 249. What are your thoughts on how Dana and the UFC handled this whole situation? Me and Billy are a little torn on this. I want to see fights. Billy's more logical and smart and realizes we're in a pandemic. But what are your thoughts about just how Dana has handled this thus far, and do you think he'll actually be able to pull this off now we're almost a week and a half away?
I still don't think it'll happen, to be honest. No, and especially after the ABC kind of came out yesterday and said that they're not going to support it. They're not going to license judges and referees, I believe they said, or if judges and referees go there, that they're not going to be looked on favorably. So, you either have people brought in off the street to ref and judge, or people are, I don't know what's going to happen. I'll do it. I know about it. Yeah. Look, we all want to see fights. I've been covering the sport for little or no fucking money for the last 10 years. Of course, I want to see fights. I love fights more than anything else, but we're in a fucking pandemic. Like, let's be honest here. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Why don't wait a month and let's see then? Like, I saw John Nash, and I think he's one of the smartest guys in MMA. He was tweeting yesterday, I think, and he said, in America, in the space of like 3 weeks, he thinks the curve will be on the top. And I was talking about on the podcast at the weekend, like, I think everyone who's ever watched MMA and knows anything about the UFC, we all know they're going to be the first ones to try to put an event on, right? But I think even the most pessimistic of people would have thought that would be at a time when we're not starting the pandemic, maybe when the pandemic is about to get slower, not even end, get slower. But no. They're doing it when everyone's just about to fucking die. That's what they're doing. And it's ridiculous. Like, I can't get on it. And like, I see people all over the internet. They're like, oh yeah, I just want to see fights, man. Oh God almighty. We all want to see fights. Like, we all want to see fights. But we're in the middle of this. People don't there's two schools of people, right? There's people who are either living under a rock and don't understand the situation, or there's people who don't care and are happy for people to die. And I think the majority of people are just people who don't understand it, to be honest. And that's a bit more worrying, I think, even than the people who don't care, because the people who don't understand it are going around licking toilet seats and spreading the disease around. And that is not a good thing. I see like toilet seat lickers all over my timeline for the last 2 days. Like, it's absolutely insane.
Probably a lot of our fans.
Yeah. Hello, how are you? But it's like, I don't think this event will happen. This private island, I think that's more likely, oddly. I don't know how, but that probably won't happen either. But like, by the time they do that, we might be in a position where something might be able to be done where you can hold it.
What if it blows over and then Dana White's got a $20 million island? What does he do with that?
Just have fights there anyway. Like, I love the idea of fights on a private island. Not while in a pandemic, though. Like, let's wait a month or 2 months and do it then. But yeah, like, I think the big problem with this is, right, look, someone could get coronavirus before they go into the cage, give it to the person they're fighting, give it to the referee, give it to the people in the hotel. That could happen. Is it going to happen? Maybe, but probably not. Maybe it could happen. It probably won't happen. But like, is someone going to get knocked out and have to go to the hospital and take up a bed for a patient in an overrun hospital? And people are saying hospitals are not overrun. It's 10 days away. Wait, they will be overrun if they're not overrun right now. Look where it was 10 days ago. So
someone's getting a broken jaw in Francis versus Rosenstruck. Someone's jaw is falling off. Calvin Kattar versus Jeremy Stevens. You're going to tell me that's not going to be a hospital visit.
Ferguson versus Gaetjhe. I'd be surprised if both go to the hospital. Like,
they're going to be stitching each other up at the end of the fight.
Exactly. Yeah.
Crazy. But that leads me to my next question. If this does go through, what do you think of the matchup of Justin versus Tony? And how excited are you for that matchup compared to Tony versus Khabib?
I'm way more excited for that fight. Now, everything has to be said with the proviso of it being with the pandemic. Let's say there's no pandemic, and we're talking about 2 fights just for a second. It's hard to do that, but I don't think there's any doubt about it. That as a fighter A versus fighter B, I think Tony Ferguson versus Gaetjhe is a way, way, way better fight than Tony Ferguson versus Khabib. Like, the great thing about Tony versus Khabib, okay, they're 2 very good fighters, but the fact is, like, they're number 1, number 2, maybe McGregor as well, but because of, behind, in front of Tony, that's a tough one to decide. Okay, McGregor's been out for an awful lot, and he hasn't proven it recently, but whatever. Look, 2 of the top 3 fighters in the world at the lightweight division, without any doubt about that. They're on huge winning streaks, and they have to fight. That's the fight to make, and that's why it's a great fight. But in terms of style matchup, Khabib is a wrestler who looks for opportunities to take people down. Tony Ferguson is a madman who gives people opportunities all the time. He's just going to take him down and out wrestle him for 5 rounds. Like, that's, and if he somehow manages to stand with him, he'll probably knock Khabib out. But that's not. I couldn't see that happen. Like, I don't think that's. I think Khabib just destroys him in that fight. To be honest, I think that's a really easy fight for Khabib. But the Ferguson Gaetjhe matchup is a very, very different fight.
That's chaos.
It is, but Justin Gaetjhe has changed in his last few fights. He's more tactical, more technical in his last few fights. And I actually think I was talking about it on the SevereMMA podcast. Like, I think, and I haven't watched like all the tape on the fights. I like to watch fighters for the fighter they're fighting before deciding fully. But I feel like if Gaetjhe had a full camp and he was fully prepared for Tony Ferguson, I'd be picking Gaetjhe to win this fight. I think because I think that he's. The thing with Ferguson is he is a good technical fighter, but he draws guys into a war and he beats them there. That's not happening with Justin Gaetjhe, I'm afraid, and especially...
He's the king of war.
Exactly. And if Gaetjhe has that additional technical and tactical ability and he can beat Tony Ferguson in the war, I think that's a very, very winnable fight for Justin Gaetjhe. Right now, I'd pick Ferguson because it's on short notice for Gaetjhe and all that, and we're in the middle of a pandemic and he can't probably... train properly, and we all know Tony Ferguson trains with inanimate objects anyway, so it doesn't really matter for him. I'll pick Ferguson right now, although I might change that before next week comes.
Yeah, well, this leads me to my next question. So with Tony and Justin being booked, what do you think's next for Conor? Because in my eyes, Conor kind of dodged a bullet not having to fight Justin Gaethje, and I could see Dana sliding him in to fight Khabib somehow.
Yeah.
What do you think's next for Conor?
Yeah, I did a podcast yesterday, and I was discussing it. And I was like, oh, yeah, who do you think he'll fight next? And I was like, Khabib, probably. Like, UFC have no problem doing it. I think the problem is, right, like, everyone is saying Nate Diaz now because the Masvidal fight seems to not be happening. The Gaethje fight that was definitely going to happen is not happening now either because Gaethje is fighting Tony. Although, maybe McGregor could fight the winner of that fight. Who knows? But Khabib will probably fight the winner of it. That's how interim titles are supposed to work.
Should work.
So who else is there? I don't think it's the right time now for the Nate Diaz fight. I think McGregor needs to keep that Nate Diaz fight for when he has nothing else. And okay, you could argue he's nothing else right now, which is probably the strongest argument for it. But I feel like because of this pandemic and people, we've short memories. I was saying, phone's just ringing there. I was saying before the fight against Cowboy that McGregor needs to take like 2 fights and then get back into a huge fight again. I don't think he's in. I don't think he's in the right place yet to be taking those huge big fights. Maybe the Nate fight is a good fight, but I'd like to see him fight someone like a Pettis I think that'd be a good fight. A former champion who's, he's no scrub. And if he wins it, it's a good win and he can move forward. And I don't think it's that tough of a matchup either. So I'd like to see him fight someone like that. But it'll probably be Khabib or maybe the winner of Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje. I don't necessarily think the Gaethje fight is a bad matchup either. I think it's probably a bad matchup right now because McGregor's only had one fight in the last or
40 seconds,
in the last 3 years or whatever it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think McGregor, people seem to forget how good McGregor actually is, especially on the feet. And I think Justin Gaethje's a very good wrestler as well, so maybe he'd take him down. But Justin Gaethje, although he's improved technically, I don't think he's as good a technical fighter as McGregor. I don't think he's as powerful as McGregor. I don't think he can pick his shots as well as McGregor. Okay, if he can last 2 or 3 rounds, he can probably take McGregor. If it goes to decision, Gaethje's probably winning that fight. But I think both of them at their best, I think McGregor destroys him, to be honest. But I don't know, is McGregor still at his best right now, or if he can ever get back to his best again? But I think that's still the big question about McGregor. We all kind of forget that a little bit, maybe because of the Cowboy fight win so well and everything. But I think that's the biggest question for him there. But I'm of the mind that he's the biggest star in the history of the sport. You build Conor McGregor back up and you give him someone like an Anthony Pettis.
So what do you think the most winnable fight is? Say you have Nate Diaz, George Masvidal, the winner of Tony versus Khabib, or the winner of Tony versus Justin. Out of those 4 guys, what do you think is the most winnable and biggest fight?
Well, the biggest fight is definitely Khabib. Unfortunately for McGregor, that's the least winnable.
No,
one.
I know.
I think they're all winnable fights for McGregor, at his best. But this is the whole question again. Where is he? If McGregor's at his best, I'd pick him to beat every single one of them. I think at 155 and where Nate is now, I think McGregor right now would probably beat Nate again, and I think he'd probably knock him out this time. I think the 170 was just terrible for McGregor. Now he's 145. McGregor, I've stood alongside him. He's not that big a guy. 170, he looks healthy at the weight, but it's not his weight class. He's a 155er. I think at his best as well, he beats Gaethje. Gaethje's just too open and he's too willing to get into a war, which late against McGregor is probably very good for him, but early against McGregor is probably going to get him knocked out, even though he's such a great chin and everything like that. I think Tony Ferguson is probably, out of all of those guys, he's probably the easiest matchup for McGregor, I think. He's just way too open and way too willing to get into a war.
Yeah.
So hittable.
Yeah.
Tony Ferguson would be one of these guys that's built up to fight McGregor and gets knocked out in 30 seconds. He could be one. He could drag McGregor into a war as well. He could drag him to the ground and submit him, which would be up there as well. But yeah, I just feel like McGregor is good enough to keep him on the feet for 2 minutes, and he'd probably knock him out in that.
Right. All right.
Sean, you got time for one more? I know I promised you 20 to 30 minutes, and we're closer to 40, so I don't want to take your whole day here. So my last topic for you is August 15th, we're supposed to have UFC Dublin. Do you think that happens? Do you think it happens with fans? And if let's say it happens, who would be your dream headliner for that?
I think it will happen. And I have a feeling I think Ireland is going to do a lot better than the UK and the US with the whole coronavirus thing. But I think the issue might be that, and it'll be a big issue for Ireland, because as I mentioned earlier, we only have 2 Irish fighters in the UFC at the moment. That if Bellator wanted to put on a card in Ireland now, they could do it with just Irish fighters. There's so many of them, they could do it.
Yeah.
But the UFC can't. If it's getting somewhat better over in the US and the UK, and they can bring guys in and maybe quarantine them here for a couple of weeks and then have them fight, then I think it probably will happen. I think we'll be all right by then. But I think, let's say if Dana White's still putting on events in in Tachi Palace or in an island or somewhere, I feel like if you could have a crowd in Ireland, wouldn't you be better off putting a Conor McGregor fight on in Ireland? Ireland, people will be at home quarantined anyway. They could buy the pay-per-view at 5 o'clock in the evening over in America and watch a Conor McGregor fight there. Now, that might not work. That might be wishful thinking of me, but you asked me for my dream one, so I'm going to say Conor McGregor versus Justin Gaethje for the UFC interim lightweight title in Dublin. But I go realistically. Everyone's talking about Darren Till versus Robert Whittaker. I love that fight. Love it. So
Us too.
Give me
that's
that.
awesome.
Yeah, I'll take that every day of the week.
Perfect. Well, Sean, we really appreciate this. Giving the people some a good dose of Irish MMA down here in Texas for the quarantine. Where can people find you if they want to read more, listen more, and do you have any shout outs or anything you want to say before we let you go here?
Shout out Nate Diaz, shout out Tommy Tohold, shout out to the secret DM group, shout out I don't know who else to shout out Patrick, shout out Andy Stevenson. You can find me at Sean Sheehan BA, SevereMMA podcast Patreon. Sign up there and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. That's all I have.
All right, Sean, you're the man. We appreciate you coming on. Yeah.
No bother at all.
Have a good one. Stay safe.
You too.
All right, thank you. See ya.
Thanks for listening to Parker's MMA Show. Take a moment to rate and review on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast, and visit ParkerKeane'sMMAShow.podbean.com for additional information on Parker and to stay up to date on the latest drama in the fight world. For more information and important links about today's episode, check out the show notes.